Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast. Leaders Podcast is a new podcast where we speak to industry leaders and experts from around the world who share their insights, knowledge, leadership journeys in the investigation and intelligence world. But today we're joined by Mr. Gary Miller, who's our first legal expert that we have on the show. So welcome, Gary. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit about your background?
So I'm a litigator by training and fell into the fraud investigation and asset recovery world when I got to Hong Kong at the beginning of my career. And since then have been really firmly and fully committed to the world of investigation. And I guess it must be the schoolboy Sherlock Holmes in me, Mike. I'm addicted to finding out things that people don't want me to find out about.
So tell me a little bit about early on in your career. What inspired you to get involved in the sort of leadership in the legal world as such?
Pretty much by sort of like a lot of people, I guess, Mike, it was finding and discounting what I didn't like and then being left or wasn't good at, and then being left with fewer options of what I did like and what I was good at. So classic example, left school at 16, which not many people know about, went to college, technical college in 1974, 73, and wanted to do a business course. Found out very quickly that actually that's not what I wanted. I actually decided that I did want to go to university. So then quick change, went to the principal at the college and said, do you do A-levels? They said, funny enough, we do, but we do different ones, law, sociology, and economics. And I said, wow, if I'd been offered those at school, I never would have left school. So I said, I'll do those, please. And then within weeks of doing the law, starting the law A-level, I thought, wow, this is just for me. I love it. I love the thinking, the arguing, the comparisons between different factual matrices. And that's really was where I got the bug for being in law, from the law A-level.
You found something you loved and continued that journey ever since.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And then you've got other roles as well, Gary. You do more than just litigate through Mishcon de Re. You have other roles that you're involved in. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. The other things I do, the main thing I do is part and parcel really of my role as a partner in a investigation and asset recovery group. But it's an adjunct to it, and it involved the creation 30 years ago of a network of like-minded lawyers across the globe who shared a similar philosophy towards asset recovery and fraud investigation, and more equally importantly, understood the fact that this area of asset recovery and investigation is a hodgepodge of many different legal skill sets. And so you had to find the people that understood that it involved a little bit of criminal, a little bit of data protection, and quite a lot of civil litigation, asset recovery, sometimes even involve political involvement, depending on where you are. So I wanted to build a network of people that thought about this space in the same way, and it's called the International Fraud Group. And I've been the chair of that since inception, which is 30 years now, Mike.
Fantastic. So having that vision back then 30 years ago of creating a group of like-minded professionals that can connect around the globe to service a international, say, client group, what benefits would that bring for the members themselves?
A lot depends on at what stage of development the law firm that we're admitting or that we're talking to is at within their own jurisdiction. So our classic profile, if you like, Mike, of a member is for sure an independent law firm we don't have as members, and nor do they seek to be members, the magic circle international law firms that have an office in every single different country, because they don't need it and they don't want it, and vice versa. So what do? We focus on the independent law firms, those that have a meaningful international footprint. We can talk a little bit about what that means, and international perspective, because some of them are far further down the road of developing an international business than others, but has to have some kind of international flavor to it, with, of course, the linguistic skills, i.e. English speaking skills that go with it, who see the long-term value add of having a group of specialists overseas that can act as their, as it were, relay team of handing the baton over to somebody when the assets or the defendant or something moves into another jurisdiction. They want that continuity, that seamless sequence of action, as if the member law firm was in business and operating in 10 different or 100 different countries. They want that seamless connectivity to get the job done.
Got it. So like an extension of your own team in another jurisdiction that you may not understand or have the expert knowledge in-house.
Exactly. But you establish, hopefully, with the membership, a set of values as to what's important, such as responsiveness, such as obviously respecting that member's involvement in the case. You wouldn't get very far in life if you were introduced a case by law firm A, and then you decided to try and grab that client and run with it and introduce them to another lawyer in England. So there's mutual respect, responsiveness. Always respond within 24 hours, because the game that you and I are involved in, Mike, is sometimes even faster than 24 hours. So you've got to have responsiveness, you've got to have respect, you've got to have reciprocity, you've got to give something back. Doesn't necessarily have to be, because many firms don't have the ability to necessarily refer a particular client, but can they reciprocate by introducing another member? Can they reciprocate by introducing a sponsor for one of our meetings? So there's a lot of ways in which people can contribute. And once you've got those fundamentals agreed, then the network is a organic, self-contributing and benefiting group of people.
Fantastic. Sounds very similar to the World Association of Detectives that we have for investigators around the globe.
Yeah.
If there are any independent lawyers who fit the criteria, have a look on the screen now. Here are the details for the International Fraud Group, the website, and Gary and his team's contact details will be on the screen soon.
Great.
Fantastic, Gary. So in terms of building the IFG, so you've done that side by side with your lawyer litigant role as well.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about how you manage your time, because people in your position, in terms of your leadership journey, running more than one hat at the same time, and I know you do everything to a super high professional level. How do you make sure that that's sustained across 3 or 4 different groups that you are, chairing?
Yeah. Well, like with the work we do together, Mike, it's all about teamwork, isn't it? You rely on people within Mishcon. So when the idea of the IFG was born, all it was an idea, and at that stage, the fraud group at Mishcon was tiny. It might have been just me. It might have been just me and Kaz. But so the resources we had were very limited. So it really started off as depending upon the marketing, whatever there was, a marketing resource within each firm, and putting aside a budget, because the first thing, we didn't have Zoom and Teams in those days, Mike. It depended upon me selling to the firm. I like the idea of this. I think it will benefit Mishcon long term. Give me a budget to, for example, hold our first meeting in the Isle of Man or in Jersey. So in the early days, it was really contained, quite small, 2 or 3 members. And it was the support of the firm and then the support within the firms that were joining as members that enabled us to do it. Without that, we would have fallen at the first hurdle. So it's all about teamwork. And 30 years later, of course, now we have a mini structure, but we couldn't do this without our executive manager, Kelly, and without the real gutsy support from the Mishcon de Rea marketing group, which is now quite a muscular group within Mishcon, and they help us and provide us with all of the logistical holding the conference, the videoing, so it's all about teamwork. Couldn't do it without Mishcon, couldn't do it without Kelly, and couldn't do it without each member firm also contributing and understanding that it's a mutually beneficial, reciprocating exercise.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for that, Gary. I'm going to bring you now into our industry, into the intelligence investigation world, and pick your brain and your experience in terms of how you've seen the industry change and develop, maybe some trends. So let's kick that off in terms of explain a little bit about your interaction with corporate, private, or professional investigations that you either manage, oversee, and how you've seen that work from your inception in terms of the legal world.
Sure. Well, I was first baptized, I guess is the word to use, into your industry in 1977 when I arrived in Hong Kong. But I was baptized in actually quite a different way that you might think. It wasn't somebody in the firm introducing me to an investigator. It was a client, a well-known international bank that had a fraud in their branch in Kowloon, Hong Kong. And by, I guess, just fortuitousness, this bank had already developed an in-depth internal investigation unit. And that unit was ex-FBI, ex-DEA, guess I've given away a little bit of information. It was an American bank, ex-CIA, etc., etc. They even had, this will make you smile, they even had a polygraph expert or two in there. So when they had a problem internally, this fella, whose name I've now forgotten, but I really loved him. He was a great guy. He used to parachute in with his polygraph machine, and you'd never get away with that these days, but that's what they did in the late 70s. And what they had done, and they had lawyers that were specialized in asset recovery and investigation all in this unit. And I'm like, this is amazing. It's like, a SWAT team, but made up of all these different investigative talents. And in the course of that investigation, they introduced me to the independent investigation companies that they used in Asia. And that was the beginning of the baptism. I got to know them. And then as you and I do, we go and meet other people. I thought to myself, listen, if this is what the rest of my career is going to be like, bring it on. I love it. I love the concept of using, overt intelligence, publicly available intelligence. In those days, you could do a lot more covertly without getting yourself into trouble, as you may recall. Or you're not young enough to have done it in those days, Mike, but you will at least read about it in books, right? I think all I can say is I got the taste for investigation and made it my business to get to know as many investigators as possible. And in those days, it was in Hong Kong, in those days, most of the investigators were spent protecting intellectual property. There hadn't yet been this seismic move of investigation into financial fraud, not at least in my area of activity. So everyone that I met was doing because Hong Kong, China was the world of the fake, replica, etc. So they were all trying to discover who had the machine for replicating this or doing that. So I really came at the investigation world through intellectual property.
And how the investigation world's changed to now.
Oh my God, has it ever?
You mentioned three-letter guys during your initial, career or exposure to the investigation world. And obviously as private sector investigators, generally or from time to time do collaborate or have a relationship as such with the public sector. How do you see private-public synergy between private and public investigators work? I know that different jurisdictions around the world, there's a lot more transparency and openness. For example, in the US, where there's investigator licensing, there's a lot more collaboration.
Yeah.
How have you found wearing more than one hat? How have you found those relationships change, and how do you see those now?
It definitely improved, to be fair, Mike. I think what's also improved is the knowledge base of the lawyers, for example, within the IFG and those that are not, they're understanding that both criminal and civil law have roles to play. Back in 1977, were it not for that bank that I was working for, I would have, like most people, have assumed if there's a fraud, it's handed over to the police, and that is the beginning and end of the involvement of an investigator. It was only by being exposed to, well, no, the police, they're great at certain things, so they're not so good, and they don't have the resources, for example, to do the asset recovery side. So that's why we go down the civil route as well as the criminal route. But in order to have those two sides even talk to each other, let alone work with each other, the lawyers, who are always the gatekeepers to the investigation, not always, but often, they need to be better equipped and understand that it's not an either or, and it's not a competitive environment, because a lot of people get nervous if you go to a criminal lawyer and say, right, we want to make a complaint, we want to do, and then they say, right, but we also want to start a legal action. Whoa, no, you can't do that, and vice versa. You go to an asset recoverer or an investigator and you say, right, this is great, we've recovered 5 million products belonging to Disney, for example, and we've got the guys that were doing it. We were able to collect or to seize the products and to get them to pay us compensation. That's it. And then the other side is no, that's not just it. Sometimes we may want to move and hand it over to the criminal side. So there wasn't much of that when I first started, and I'm delighted to say that that world has expanded considerably. But a lot depends upon the legal environment of the jurisdiction that you're operating.
This is another question for investigators, really, or your insight. And with the lack of licensing in the UK at the moment, even though associations like the ABI, the Association of British Investigators, have been pushing for licensing and or self-regulated, a lot of the investigators are self-regulated in the UK. Do you think that has an effect on private-public synergy, as in presenting or getting authorities to assist in a private matter or fraud matter? I know there's a lot of guys that have worked in the public sector that then come into the private sector. I suppose there's some collaboration there in terms of processes that are similar. How do you see that dynamic fit, especially with the lack of, or only the self-regulating licensing that we have? Well, we don't have any licensing at the moment in the UK, but how do you see that?
From my experience, and of course, really only that which I can talk from, I don't think clients that I have worked with, and again, it depends on the package of the team that you're working with, because each organization mutually accredits its partner in the work that it's doing. So without wishing to pick up Mishcons, for example, and it wouldn't necessarily have been the case 30 years ago, but if you go now to a Mishcon or to another large firm and they say to the client, we're going to use X, there's a transferred credibility factor that goes with that. And whether or not that company was regulated or not regulated, to be honest, the client doesn't really worry that much. What they worry about is reputationally and legally, is the law firm comfortable that this investigation outfit knows what they're doing and knows not to expose them, the client and the organization and the team, to liability? So it's not really come up much in my 30 odd years of operating here in the UK, but I can see how, and maybe it's unique to America. I don't know. I don't know enough. You've operated. Maybe it's a question that you can fill me in. Is does it make a difference in the US? Does it separate the men from the boys there? Do you think?
Well, out of the 52 states, I believe 48 require licensing, and licensing from state to state varies, Gary. So some states it's a administrative process only. Other states there are some professional hours that you need to commit, and there's an exam that you need to take. I sat my New York licensing exam a few years ago, and quite difficult to do, being from the UK, trying to understand American terminology in questions and on. However, yeah, each state is different. But what the license over there or in the US gives you is legal access to certain databases and information that can assist in conducting investigations. And also, there's a fallback option. There's a monitoring body, a licensing group. You mentioned something key, I think, and that was the legal firm, whichever it is, endorsing the third party, endorsing the investigator, having a working relationship with an investigator that puts the client into a safe pair of hands. And that, I think, to be honest with you, not just in this world, but in every world, is people by people. People develop relationships with individuals. And I think that's how the world works. In terms of trying to regulate the industry, that's a huge exercise for anyone looking to tackle that. But it's interesting to have different opinions and thoughts, especially with someone like yourself who's been in the industry for almost 50 years, Gary. So you're bringing in a wide group of years with lots of change. That's important. So what challenges do you see the independent investigator face in this world where there's so much out there in terms of misinformation, misdirection, or just the independent investigator in tackling this
the way
space?
That I see it, Mike, is that interestingly, the role of the independent investigator, let's say the 1 to 20 man band, not the big multinational magic circle investigators, if you like. And as with any profession or industry, they make up the bulk of it. The smaller organisations, as they do in the law, 80% of the of lawyers are smaller organisations. And whilst I think they went through a real tough time with the introduction of all of the data protection legislations and the regulatory and compliance world that impacts either directly or indirectly the money that they get from people to do the investigation. But I don't know what your view is, but I think actually they are benefiting from the immense amount of information that's available to the public and via social media. I think social media has brought back the independent player into the same or very, very similar sandbox as the huge investigator. So much that can be done with smart social media collection, and also the world of personal surveillance. Maybe the equipment has got more sophisticated, but the bottom line is that that's a people-intensive business, and you've got to know the right people, and it's still as popular today as it has been, provided obviously within reason where the targets are. So my instinct is that the independent guys are coming back into their own because they can play in the same sandbox with the similar tools.
Yeah, good way to think about it, actually. I know the challenges that investigators face is there's too much information out there now. We're talking about sifting through false positives and negative, with the spread of misinformation and what's out there that's publicly available to anyone. It's how do you go through and confirm what's right and what isn't. Thank you, Gary. It's been really interesting to leave us with one thought, really, and a couple of takeaways for everyone that's been listening. If you could give some leadership philosophy and a little bit of advice and some key takeaways for the guys that are coming into the market, the guys that are in this industry that are maybe finding some of it tough or challenging, and the guys that are, looking to progress even further. Could you give us just a summary of your experience?
I guess there's a cliche or two that is called for: under promise, over deliver. I don't think those words can ever be emphasized enough in anything, but particularly in relation to the investigative world. Clients push you to overpromise. They don't push you to underdeliver. The clients push you to overpromise and to deliver. There is a temptation for every investigator, particularly those that are newer to the game, to promise the world. And whilst it might get you an easy, quick win at the beginning, it really comes back to you in spades, because you're not able, when you're not able to deliver exactly what the client thinks. And also make sure that the clients understand the product that they are likely to get as a result of using you, because they don't understand it. Don't assume just because they've been talking for a few hours about, well, we need to trace this bank account there and back, that you've got to really bring them down to ground level and say, right, this is the maximum we're going to get with or without legal assistance or without the police, so that they understand what the boundaries are, because they're not as familiar with what you're doing as you think they are.
Fantastic bit of advice there. Under promise, over deliver, and managing clients' expectations. 2 key points in helping you in this world of intelligence, investigation, and litigation.
Thank you, sir.
Gary Miller, thank you very much for your time. Gary Miller's contact details are on the screen if anyone wants to reach out to Gary Miller direct. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Leaders Podcast.